Hey everyone, and welcome to this episode of Told Her the Podcast. I'm back. I'm your host, Devyn Penny. I'm a certified self development coach and author, and I'm here to have open, honest conversations about what it's like to be in your 20s, what it was like to be in my 20s, and what I wish I knew then, what I know now, how my life is different in my 30s, and hopefully share some experiences and maybe some wisdom with you. So, I have been off the grid for 2.5, almost 3 weeks, and it's actually been really nice. But I was forced off of the grid. First, I willingly was just not on social media for a minute and thought I had videos that were queued up for the weekend. I went on a mini vacation. Truly, in 3 years, I have not been on a vacation that is just about sitting and doing nothing and relaxing and drinking and eating and having fun. And I needed that. So I was very intentional about the fact that I was going to try to be off of social media, that I batched videos beforehand. And then, of course, I'm traveling. The videos don't upload. I don't have my computer with me. Fine. Took that in stride. And then when I got back, realized that my phone was really the thing that was screwing things up because it had no storage. So it wouldn't even let me post an Instagram story to say, hey, be back soon. Got to get a new phone. But my phone was ordered. I finally have a new one. I have tons and tons of storage. I have a terabyte now, which hopefully means I won't run out of storage for the foreseeable future. And by that, I mean the next 18 months while I'm locked into this phone contract. So we're back and feeling good. And I noticed over the kind of 2 week hiatus and really just things being out of my control, how differently I handled things now versus how I would have handled things back in my early 20s, especially. But I want to talk today about perfection because it is something that I have struggled with my entire life. And I have now really noticed some of the root causes, but also just how large of an effect it had on me and my personality and who I am, my relationships, etc., and how I kind of overcame being so obsessed with having everything be perfect. Past version of Devyn, if I was off the grid, forced off the grid for more than even a day, I would immediately start to spiral and go into, I'm not being consistent. No one's going to watch my stuff when I come back. I promised this to people and then I didn't deliver, and that makes me a bad person. Feeling guilt about that, feeling like, again, I needed everything to just be perfect and that I needed to present this very perfect picture to the world. And as time has gone on, these past 2 weeks, I really was so proud of myself because I totally just leaned into it instead of fighting it and forcing it and feeling a type of way because something wasn't exactly the way that it was supposed to go. I allowed myself to take that time to write, take that time to do other things, take that time to see friends, to hang out with family, to just be more present in general. And it felt really good. And as this was all happening, I was noticing just my own behavioral patterns that have shifted over the past decade, really, where I now can actually just accept things as they are for the most part and not try and put them in this pretty little box with a bow on it and shove it in the corner that it's meant to be in. So going back to my childhood, I noticed from a very young age that people were praised, myself included, for doing things exceptionally well or doing things in a quote unquote perfect way. So, whether that was getting good grades, or that was cleaning the dishes well, or that was making sure that my room was spotless, or if it was taking care of someone well, taking care of myself well, doing something on a sports field well, I recognized that perfection or perceived perfection was widely celebrated. And I think, as all children do, I observed what adults' reactions to my successes and failures were. And they were a lot better to my successes, obviously. So I took it on that if I wanted to be well liked and heard and seen and loved, that everything that I did was going to be perfect. It was my sole mission to make sure that I was not only efficient and doing things well, but that I was doing all of the things. So, this additional pressure of I can do all things and I can do them all perfectly was at the forefront and in the center of my life for a very long time. That included everything from, again, being good in school to being well behaved to doing the right thing and making sure that everyone was included. I was a perfectionist in all sense of the word. And looking back on that period of time in my life, the pressure that I was putting on myself, and again, like I definitely was reacting to other people's reaction to me, but I put a lot of that on myself because I felt like in order to be the best version of me, that it meant that everything had to be sorted at all possible moments in time. Not a spelling error, not a mistake. I did not fuck up as a child. And I don't know how to say that in any other way. I was so obsessed with my parents thinking that I was perfect and other people thinking that I was perfect. My grandparents, my aunts and uncles, my friend group, other people's parents. I just wanted to be like the good all around person. Little pressure. So as I got older and I realized that this was less and less sustainable, I started to panic. And then I would overcompensate for the things that I felt like I wasn't doing well, or I would punish myself and be really hard on myself. And I think that when we think of perfectionism, we think of it only affecting us as the individual, right? I was a perfectionist and it was a lot of pressure and there was a lot riding on X, Y, and Z thing. But what I found was that it ruined a lot of my relationships in the sense that perfectionism cannot exist in gray area. It can only exist in black and white. And therefore, everything in my life was black or it was white. And there was no in between. For myself, for other people, I was so rigid and so rule oriented with myself and with others that it started to put a strain on a lot of my relationships in the sense that if something wasn't exactly right or wrong, this or that, one or the other, I couldn't handle it. I literally could not handle it and I would remove myself, detach. I still find myself as an adult having to stop myself from doing that. When someone else's actions or when some feeling comes up or something that I can't put into a compartmentalized box of this is black or white, that I then find myself having to really override feelings of detach, abort, leave, don't engage, and really having to process through and work through those feelings of being okay without everything having a perfect answer and a perfect place. So, when I was growing up and I was in relationships, romantic relationships especially, but also in friendships, I was so hard on myself and I was so obsessed with my own desire and my own need to be perfect that it automatically bled into what my perception of other people was. I was so hard on myself, and therefore I was so hard on other people. The standard was so high for me that therefore the standard was so high for other people. And I have had many conversations in my life with people who have said to me, like, I'm human, I'm not perfect. And my genuine response when I was younger was, okay, but then I don't want that. I want perfect. I felt like perfection gave me a sense of control. If I could perfect something, or if something went exactly the way that I wanted it to, needed it to, then I had control over the outcome somehow. And the problem with that is that as you get older and your world gets bigger, you realize that not everything is black and white, and not everything has a perfect little pretty place. And you can't control the outcomes to many situations. And most situations involve more than one party. So, singularly, even if I was perfect and I did everything right, the bigger my world got, the more shit I could not control with perfectionism or anything else. So, I found myself kind of at this crossroads of, okay, this is now a part of my identity. right? Being perfect in my mind is now part of my identity. And I remember like small things, even being on vacation when I was like 16, 17 years old, and my mom saying to me, like, your skin is so flawless, like the skin on my body. Like I was perfectly tan and perfectly smooth and always perfectly shaved and all of these different things. I remember in that moment thinking to myself that I could not even receive that as a compliment. Instead, it panicked me that I was going to have to maintain this perfection, right? And of course, that's not my mom's fault. And it had nothing to do with the fact that she actually probably gave a shit whether or not my skin was perfect or completely fucked up. I'm sure she does not care, did not care, was not implying that whatsoever. But that is how I took things on. The lens through which I saw everything was this requires maintenance. This requires extreme effort. This needs to be something that I put all of my time and energy into in order for it to be right. Not necessarily because it felt so good for me, but because the perception of other people matters so much to me. As I got older and my world got bigger, there are more people whose perceptions I needed to worry about. And it was exhausting. It was beyond what I could have ever imagined that it developed into, which again was not only hurting every other relationship that I had, because one, I always assumed that people were perceiving me. And also that I always assumed that because I could live up to this crazy high standard that I had set for myself, that other people should be held to the same standard and have consequences if they weren't. And lastly, it just made me really not fucking like myself unless I was 100% perfect in every single thing that I did. That's a lot of pressure. When I even say it now, I feel so tense because I remember the implication of what being perfect meant to me and what I felt like was my duty and my role in a lot of ways, especially because as you go along, people just naturally praise you for the things that you do well. And if you're trying so hard to do everything well, you're probably doing most things well. But it was taking, again, an exorbitant amount of time and energy and brain space. And even when I received a compliment, like I said before, it was never about feeling like someone was actually seeing me. It was someone perceiving me and then me thinking about how I was going to maintain that perception of perfection. So there was a moment in time where I was in a relationship with someone and they were not being perfect. And I thought I was being perfect. And this is the other thing that no one really talks about when it comes to perfection is that your own perception of yourself is that you're being perfect, but to the rest of the world, I don't want to say that I was a nightmare, but I was very rigid. I was very, again, rule oriented. I was someone who had no room in my life for my own error or the error of others. I wasn't really allowing humanity to do what it's meant to do, which is just exist. So I was in a relationship, and this particular person continuously pointed out to me that like our path of relationship was not going to be perfect, and that either really mattered to me enough that I had to leave the relationship, or it was something that I could process and work through, and that there were going to be moments of gray area and we were going to disagree on things, and their standard was different than my standard. And at the time, this person was quite a bit older than I was. And it didn't really seem like no matter what I wanted from him in terms of perfection or sort of this persona that I wanted to be with, that he was very willing to change. Okay, this relationship did not work out, spoiler alert. But what I learned in it was that the gray area wasn't so bad. It wasn't so terrible to not have a perfect relationship. It was difficult in moments, but the world kept turning. This was like when I was 25. And I actually just recently talked to this person, and they were reminding me of all these kind of like rules that I had for myself, for us in the relationship, like exhausting stuff that I don't even identify with now, thank God, because I've had so much evolution in this particular area. But I very specifically remember being outside of that relationship and really being cognizant of the fact that this perfectionism was not only ruining my personal relationships, but it was so deep into my businesses that I wasn't enjoying anything that I was doing. So it didn't matter if I was super passionate about something, unless it was perfect, it wasn't good enough for me. It didn't matter if I loved something so much or if I just needed to do a project to get it out of my system, to have catharsis in it. It didn't matter if it didn't sell well. So I was putting extreme amounts of pressure on myself, again, not only in relationships, but in my businesses, in my career. And it wasn't going well because it prevented me from doing so many of the things that I'm actually good at, which for so many years were so out of my comfort zone because I couldn't control all the factors, right? For example, me getting on this video right now, I can't control how you perceive me. And in the past, that would have been enough for me to let the fear of how you might perceive me, regardless of my intention and who I know that I am and my level of confidence, would have prevented me from getting on here and making a video like this or making a podcast or just speaking my thoughts. So it prevented me from doing a lot of things for a very, very long time. And I started to recognize that why I wasn't moving forward in my career in the way that I wanted to was because I was held back by this level of perfection that was not only unattainable, but at this point in time was like a literal waste of time. So I had a life coach at the time, and this was a conversation we had very often about the fact that I needed everything to be perfect and wanted everything to be just so. And that gray area inevitably exists, and things are out of my control. And so, what the fuck do I do about it? And as we were talking through this, I remember having like visceral reactions to what would happen if I put something out into the world that I thought was imperfect, right? If it had a spelling error, or if I missed a word, or if I did a video and didn't look perfect. And just the thought of that rattled me. So I am someone who leans into discomfort like that. When I can pinpoint something and I can see where it's coming from and think about, oh, this is what would make me really uncomfortable, I am actually okay with taking a step into the discomfort and tackling it head on. So once I had sort of illuminated my fears on this very tangible level, I then could go into the world and make some fucking mistakes. And that's exactly what I did. I started purposefully making mistakes, not because I wanted to be known as somebody who made a lot of mistakes, but because I needed to prove to myself that everybody was fine. Nobody hated me. The perception of me was still that I was good at my job. I was good in a relationship. I was good at all these different things that I was doing. And that the world kept turning. I needed to prove that to myself. And you might be listening to this and think how silly this sounds, but I would intentionally make errors. I would intentionally make spelling errors in emails that I would send out to 5,000 people. And that was a challenge for me. And it tested my ability to not only have some resilience in this, but also to recognize that no matter what I'm doing and no matter what I'm putting out into the world, whether it's my behavior and attitude, my actions, my relationship with someone else, my videos on YouTube or social media, etc., that other people's perception of whether or not I am good enough does not determine whether or not I actually am. And the confidence that making mistakes gave me was far greater than any of the confidence that I ever had being a super hard on myself perfectionist. So this process of recovery from perfectionism has gone on for the last 5 or so years. And I have really leaned into this idea of authenticity being the thing that wins over perfection. I would rather be myself and have people perceive me in whatever which way they feel like, but really know that I am being genuine and being who I am meant to be on a regular basis, whether people understand that or not, whether I even understand that sometimes or not, and feel good about that at the end of the day versus feel horrible and be in knots all the time about the fact that I needed things to be better. I needed to be better. I wasn't good enough if I wasn't perfect or if I wasn't doing things the right way, and feel constantly shitty about myself but have other people perceive me to be great. A lot of this comes with age because I think your give a shit meter about what other people think of you just naturally kind of starts dissipating over time once you realize how much happier you are when you are living for yourself and not for others. So, if you are a perfectionist, if you are a recovering perfectionist, and again, this still comes up for me in a lot of ways, there are moments in time where I genuinely have to take a step back and say, you want this to be perfect, and this is not about perfection. This is about process, and the process is never perfect. Even if the result seems perfect sometimes, the process is full of everything that is uncomfortable and that makes you grow and evolve, but that sucks a lot of the time. And I have to constantly remind myself that process and perfection don't really coexist, and that not everything needs to be packaged up and pretty and look a certain way and feel a certain way, and that my authenticity and my life's work in a lot of ways, whether that's in relationships, in career, with my family, with my friends, with myself, is to be true to myself, is to be good for me, is not to worry about how many people like or see this video. It's about creating a space for myself that feels, again, authentic and real, and like, if I'm not perfect today, I can still do what I feel like doing, even if I don't feel like I can do this perfectly or anything perfectly, that it doesn't stop me from trying and from sometimes succeeding and sometimes failing. And most importantly, just realizing that the world keeps turning. So, my greatest advice would be to make intentional mistakes. Don't fuck up your life, but make mistakes that seemingly matter so much to you that will shock you how little they matter to everyone else. And while this is not about other people accepting your mistakes or your imperfections, it will get you used to really being okay with the fact that you're going to have good days, you're going to have bad days, you're going to have days in between, and that you still are worthy of showing up in all of those modes, in all of your moods, in all of your imperfection. So if this resonates with you at all, one, take the pressure off of yourself. It's exhausting. I feel exhausted talking about it. Take a deep breath, relax your shoulders, and take some of the additional pressure that you're putting on yourself off. It's not worth it. It's not necessary. It's hard to be hard on yourself. Secondly, go fuck up. That's it. Have a great day.